Malcolm Reed adjusted the cuffs of his simple but neat pressed shirt as he stepped through the glass doors of the Lighthaven Community Library. Though the building had a clean, modern design with high ceilings and natural light flooding in through skylights, there was an unspoken tension in the air the moment he entered. He walked with quiet confidence, carrying nothing but a folder under one arm. Today was an important meeting and that he had been looking forward to for months. But before he could take more than a few steps inside, a voice stopped him cold. "Excuse me, sir," said a stern voice behind the front desk. A young white security guard, no older than his late 20s, approached Malcolm with narrowed eyes and a hand resting near his utility belt. "This area is closed to the public today. I'll have to ask you to leave." Malcolm paused and responded calmly. "I have a meeting scheduled with the director. My name is Malcolm Reed." The guard didn't check any list. He didn't reach for a phone. Instead, he looked Malcolm up and down and scoffed. "I don't think so," he said. "Meetings here are by appointment only." Malcolm stayed composed. "Yes," he repeated, "I have an appointment." But Kyle the guard stood firm, arms crossed. There was something in his tone, not just authority but dismissal, as if he had already decided Malcolm didn't belong in a place like this. From the front desk, a receptionist glanced over and raised an eyebrow before turning back to her computer. A couple sitting nearby looked up from their books and gave Malcolm a passing glance long enough to judge, but not long enough to care. Malcolm took a breath. He wasn't new to these moments, those split seconds, when people assumed who he was based solely on what he looked like. Still, it didn't sting any less. "I'm just asking you to check the schedule," Malcolm said quietly, his voice steady. But Kyle shook his head. "Sir, I'm going to need you to wait outside. This isn't open access. People can't just walk in here and expect to be led upstairs." Malcolm stood his ground, saying nothing more for now. Kyle's words hung in the air like a warning bell, sharp, final, and deeply familiar. Malcolm didn't flinch. He'd been through worse. Still, something about this moment, the way everyone looked away instead of speaking up, cut deeper than usual. Kyle folded his arms tighter across his chest, clearly convinced of his authority and judgment. "People like you always think the rules don't apply, huh?" He muttered under his breath, not quite loud enough for the room to react, but just loud enough for Malcolm to hear. Malcolm's jaw tightened, but his eyes remained calm. "People like me?" he asked, voice still even. Kyle shrugged, glancing around as if searching for backup. "Look, I'm not trying to start anything, but this is a professional space. You can't just show up without, credentials." A woman at the front desk, who had been listening while pretending not to, chuckled softly. She leaned over to another staff member and whispered something with a smirk. One or two nearby guests exchanged quiet glances and disapproving nods, assuming they understood the story, a man who didn't belong, trying to get into a place that wasn't his kind of environment. Nearby, a young girl, no older than 9, sat on the floor flipping through a picture book. She tugged gently at her mother's sleeve and asked in a whisper, "Why won't they let that man in?" Her mother looked over at Malcolm, then quickly back at her daughter. "Don't worry about it, sweetheart," she said, her voice clipped. "Just keep reading." The words weren't cruel, but the silence that followed the silence from every adult in that lobby was deafening. No one asked what Malcolm needed. No one stepped in. It was as though he had become invisible except for the judgment in their stares. Still, Malcolm didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. He simply pointed once more to the wall behind the front desk, where a schedule of the day's events was neatly printed and posted. His name was right there, Mr. Malcolm Reed, Community Leadership Meeting Boardroom B, 2:00 p.m. "I'd appreciate it if you just took a moment to read the schedule," he said, voice calm but firm. "That's all I'm asking." Kyle didn't even glance. "Sir, I'm not going to argue. Please step outside." The tension in the room was now thick enough to choke on, but Malcolm didn't step back. He didn't need to, because just then the echo of footsteps, confident and deliberate, came from the hallway beyond the reception area. A woman in a slate gray suit turned the corner, her presence shifting the air the moment she appeared. The woman's heels clicked steadily across the polished tile as she approached the lobby. Her posture was sharp, her eyes focused, someone clearly accustomed to being in charge. As she entered the room, her gaze swept quickly over the scene before her. She noticed Kyle standing stiffly near the entrance. She noticed Malcolm calm, steady, yet clearly being blocked. And she noticed the uncomfortable silence hanging in the room like thick smoke. "Mr. Reed," she called out warmly, a genuine smile forming on her face. "I'm so sorry for the delay. The boardroom is ready for you." Every head in the room turned. Kyle's arms slowly dropped to his sides, his face drained of color. "Wait, Mr. Reed," he repeated barely above a whisper. The woman approached Malcolm and extended her hand respectfully. It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person. I'm Evelyn Harper, director of the library. I've been looking forward to this meeting. Kyle's mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came out. He looked over at the receptionist, who now avoided his eyes entirely. I see there's been some misunderstanding, Evelyn added, her tone sharpening as she turned briefly toward Kyle. Is there a reason you were preventing our guest from entering, Mr. Reed being? She paused just long enough for impact. The very founder of the Community Literacy Initiative this library is built on. Kyle stammered, I didn't know. He didn't say. I believe he did, Evelyn interrupted, her voice cool, more than once from what I gathered. The room fell silent. No one dared look Malcolm in the eye, not even the couple who had been whispering earlier. The little girl from before watched intently, eyes wide, as if trying to understand the shift in the air. Malcolm nodded politely to Evelyn. It's all right, he said gently. Let's go ahead to the meeting. But Evelyn wasn't finished. She turned back to Kyle and said loud enough for everyone in the lobby to hear, this library is a space for learning, growth, and dignity. It will not be a space for prejudice, silent or spoken. Kyle nodded, his face flushed with shame. He didn't say another word. As Evelyn and Malcolm walked together toward the meeting room, the room was left in stunned silence. A silence not of indifference this time, but of realization. As they walked down the quiet hallway toward the boardroom, the buzz of the lobby faded behind them. The sound of their footsteps echoed softly, but Malcolm said nothing at first. He didn't need to. His silence spoke volumes of the years, the moments, the accumulated weight of experiences like the one he had just endured. Evelyn glanced over at him, visibly troubled. I'm truly sorry, Mr. Reed, she said. This shouldn't have happened. Not here, not in a place that stands for inclusion and knowledge. Malcolm offered a faint smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. It's not the first time, he replied. And I doubt it'll be the last, but it never gets easier. Evelyn nodded, her voice softer now. When we designed this library, your vision was what drove us. A place where everyone, regardless of background, status, or color, would feel welcome, safe, seen. I feel like we've betrayed that vision today. Malcolm stopped in front of the boardroom door and turned to her. His voice was quiet but steady. What happened in the lobby isn't just about me. It's about what so many people face every day. The quiet dismissal, the assumption that they don't belong. I created this initiative because I wanted to give people a space that told them otherwise. Evelyn's eyes glistened with emotion. You did, and you still do. But we clearly have more work to do. I promise you, after today, we'll be reviewing everything: our policies, our training, our staff awareness. Malcolm gave a slow nod. Awareness is a start, but what matters is action. If even one child walks through these doors and is made to feel the way I just did, we've failed. They entered the boardroom where a small group of people stood waiting around a long table. But as Malcolm stepped inside, the mood shifted. Several stood a little straighter. Others looked towards him with respect, many clearly unaware of the incident that had just occurred. Evelyn introduced him with pride. Everyone, this is Mr. Malcolm Reed, the man whose vision helped build this library into what it is today. And for the first time since he'd arrived, Malcolm was greeted not with suspicion, but with gratitude. The meeting began as planned, but there was a quiet intensity in the room now. Malcolm shared updates on the literacy program he had helped launch, a project aimed at giving children from underserved communities access to books, mentorship, and a place to feel safe. He spoke with purpose, with clarity, and without a trace of bitterness in his voice. But beneath every word was a deeper current, one that no one in the room could ignore. When the meeting concluded, Evelyn turned to Malcolm once more. Thank you, she said sincerely, not just for everything you've built here, but for how you handled today. With grace I'm not sure I would have had. Malcolm looked out the tall windows of the boardroom for a moment before responding. I didn't build this place for myself. I built it for the people who've been told their whole lives they don't belong in places like this. For kids who grow up thinking libraries, colleges, even hope are out of their reach. He turned back to her, his voice heavier now. That little girl in the lobby, she saw what happened, and now she'll carry that image with her unless we give her something else to believe in. Evelyn nodded slowly, visibly moved. Then let's make sure she does, she said, starting today. As they walked back through the hallway, Malcolm noticed something had changed in the air. People who had looked past him earlier now glanced up, some offering quiet nods of acknowledgement or uneasy smiles. Kyle was no longer at the front desk. A different staff member stood there, alert, professional, and respectful. Just before Malcolm reached the exit, he heard a small voice. "Mr. Reed." He turned. It was the young girl from before, holding her book tightly against her chest. Her mother stood nearby, watching with a mix of pride and apology. The girl stepped forward and said softly, "I want to help build a library someday, too." Malcolm's expression softened. He crouched down to meet her eye level. "You can, sweetheart," he said gently. "And you don't have to wait until you're grown up. You help build a better world every time you treat someone with kindness." She smiled wide, and he smiled back genuinely this time. As Malcolm stepped back out into the sunlight, the warmth on his skin felt different. Not just from the sun, but from something deeper. A shift, a ripple. And though it had started with a door being closed on him, he knew the real work was in helping others open theirs. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky as Malcolm stepped outside, casting a warm, amber light across the quiet street. He paused for a moment on the library steps, taking in the stillness. The tension from earlier had faded, replaced by something softer, something earned. Behind him, through the glass doors, the library buzzed on. Books were being checked out. Pages turned. Conversations hummed at low volume. Life moved forward. But something had shifted, not just in the building, but in the people. Small things. Quiet things. A few hesitant glances had turned to nods of respect. A few dismissive faces had softened into ones of reflection. And perhaps most importantly, a child, just one, but enough, had seen a man face prejudice and not let it break him. She had seen dignity stand taller than judgment. As Malcolm walked toward his car, Evelyn stepped outside to join him one last time. "You may not realize it," she said, "but what happened today, it's going to ripple through this place for a long time." Malcolm looked at her thoughtfully. "It's not about making ripples," he said. "It's about making sure the next person who walks through that door doesn't have to." They shook hands, no more apologies, just mutual understanding. And as Malcolm drove away, he didn't carry bitterness. He carried purpose. A quiet kind of power, the kind that doesn't need shouting to be heard, the kind that turns silent rooms into spaces of change. Because the real victory wasn't in proving who he was. It was in never forgetting it, no matter who tried to make him. The following week, the Lighthaven Library released a quiet but significant announcement. A new initiative would launch in the name of Malcolm Reed. It would focus on inclusion training, community outreach, and a youth leadership program built not just to teach literacy, but to teach empathy. But Malcolm didn't need a press release. For him, the real impact had already happened in a quiet moment with a little girl holding a book and a question in her eyes. On the day the new program began, Malcolm returned to the library. No big speeches, no cameras, just presence. As he walked through the lobby this time, no one stopped him. In fact, the same receptionist who once ignored him now greeted him with a polite nod and said, "Welcome back, Mr. Reed." Kyle was no longer at the desk. No one mentioned him. But the space felt different, more open, more aware. As if the building itself had taken a deep breath and exhaled something heavy. Malcolm wandered into the children's section where a group of kids sat in a circle listening to a volunteer read aloud. Among them was the same young girl from before. She looked up, spotted him, and beamed. She didn't wave, just gave him a knowing little smile, the kind that said, "I remember you." Malcolm smiled back, then quietly took a seat in the corner listening. He didn't need the spotlight. He didn't need a name on the wall. The real legacy he was building was already alive in stories being told, in minds being opened, in moments that quietly changed the way people see one another. And perhaps most powerfully of all, it lived in the silence. Not the silence of judgment, but the silence of respect. Some victories don't come with applause. They come with a look, a smile, a changed heart. And sometimes the most powerful protest is simply staying kind in a world that tells you not to be.